The base was a wreck of smoke and silence after the siege. Vehicles twisted, radios dead, the wounded lined against a wall. Through the haze, General's voice broke. "Any Apache pilots here?" No one answered. Then the woman everyone had assumed was just a mechanic, grease-stained, quiet, nearly invisible, set down her wrench and stepped forward. No speech, no ceremony. Just movement. If true skill needs no introduction, she was proof. For months she'd been stationed at the forward operating base, officially listed as an aviation maintenance technician, the kind of role that keeps everything running but earns little notice. Her coveralls smelled permanently of oil and hydraulic fluid. She knew every torque value and assembly point by heart. Pilots passed her daily, cracking jokes about wrench monkeys while brushing dust off their flight suits, symbols of their elevated status. To them, she was part of the scenery, competent, unseen, and unimportant. In the mess hall, she sat at the edges, listening but never joining in. Solitude suited her. It spared her questions about a past that didn't exist on any record. Her coworkers knew her as the one who showed up early, worked with precision, and left without lingering. She fixed what was broken, anticipated what might fail, and kept logs so meticulous they exceeded protocol. When the siege began, mortar fire, small arms bursts, and an assault that pressed the perimeter harder than ever before, her quiet efficiency became something else, decisive. She patched ruptured fuel lines under fire, hands steady even as explosions shook the hangars. She hauled supply crates into defensive walls, shielding vital equipment. Nobody stopped to notice. In battle, competence goes unremarked when survival takes precedence. She worked without orders, just instinct and purpose. By the time the attackers withdrew, half the base's systems were still functional, a miracle. The Apache gunships sat idle, their trained pilots either dead or medevaced. When dawn broke, the general's voice rose again. "Any qualified Apache pilots?" Silence. Everyone knew the truth. No one left could fly them. She didn't ask permission. She didn't even speak. She wiped her hands on the rag at her belt and walked toward the nearest helicopter. The hangar fell silent, the kind of silence heavier than smoke. Whispers followed her. "She's just a mechanic." "What's she doing?" Then nervous laughter from those expecting the general to put her back in her place. But the general didn't move. His expression shifted, not confusion, but recognition. Her steps weren't uncertain, they were practiced. Every motion spoke of experience earned somewhere far beyond a maintenance bay. He knew the difference between a pretender and a professional. She climbed into the Apache like someone coming home. Her hands moved across the controls with fluid confidence, every switch and sequence executed from memory. Not theory, not training manuals, but the kind of knowledge that only years in the cockpit could give. Every motion she made was deliberate and efficient, evidence of thousands of prior repetitions that had engraved the sequences into muscle memory. The general's eyes narrowed as understanding began to dawn. He wasn't just watching a mechanic, he was watching a pilot at work. "Where did you train on Apaches?" he finally asked, his voice more confirmation than inquiry. But she didn't answer. Her focus was absolute. Her hands moved through the pre-flight sequence with practiced precision, pulling the startup lever and initiating engine priming as if she'd done it countless times before. The turbines wound up with their distinctive rising whine. Power indicators glowed to life across the console. Dust swirled through the hangar as rotor wash kicked up debris, forcing nearby soldiers to shield their eyes. The helicopter they had written off as inoperable was now roaring back to life under her command. A young lieutenant muttered what everyone else was thinking, clinging to protocol even as reality shifted before him. "She can't possibly be certified to," he never finished. The heads-up display blinked to full readiness, systems green across the board. Moments later, the Apache lifted smoothly from the tarmac. No hesitation, no wobble, just the calm control of a pilot who belonged in the seat. The gathered personnel collectively drew breath, the sound audible even through the turbine roar. What they were seeing didn't fit any regulation or checklist they knew. Someone without authorization, without a record, had just proclaimed a war machine through sheer skill. For the first time since the siege began, the silence of defeat gave way to something else, recognition. She had always been there, unseen, underestimated, her true ability buried beneath assumptions about her title. Skill revealed in silence, the kind that rewrites everything. If you've ever proved them wrong without a word, this was that moment. Beyond the base perimeter, the enemy was regrouping in the valley, confident the defenders had no air power left. Their intelligence reports confirmed it. Every Apache pilot was dead or incapacitated. They were preparing their final assault, certain no gunship would rise to stop them. Then the ground began to tremble, the deep, rhythmic vibration unmistakable to any soldier who had ever fought near helicopters. Heads turned skyward. On one side, disbelief. On the other, dread. The dark silhouette of an F-64 Apache swept low over the valley, rotor blades slicing through the dawn air with mechanical grace. Inside, the woman once dismissed as a grease-stained mechanic moved with the poise of a seasoned combat aviator. Her hands adjusted the collective for low-altitude flight, synchronized the targeting systems, and locked onto enemy positions with the ease of someone who had done this under fire before. Every motion was exact, efficient, proof of hard-earned mastery. Rockets streaked from the pylons, slamming into ammunition dumps and weapon stockpiles. The ridgeline erupted, shockwaves of fire and shrapnel rolling through the valley as explosions cascaded in a chain reaction. The enemy advance shattered instantly, formations breaking apart under the unexpected assault. On the ground, U.S. infantry and SEALs cheered and pointed skyward, faces split between disbelief and exhilaration. Over radio channels, frantic voices tried to confirm what they were seeing. A ghost Apache, flown by someone who wasn't supposed to exist. She banked hard, bringing the helicopter around for another pass, precise, fearless, unstoppable. The Apache skimmed just above the treetops, maintaining an altitude so low that its rotor wash rippled through the canopy like a living storm. It moved with a predator's grace, fast, deliberate, perfectly balanced, cutting across the horizon with precision that spoke of absolute mastery. This was not the flight profile of someone testing limits. This was a professional operating within the narrow, lethal margin that only experience could command. Her maneuvers defied textbook convention. She wasn't flying standard patterns or executing procedural tactics from flight manuals. Every sharp bank, every evasive roll, every controlled drop through terrain contours was calculated to deliver maximum weapons efficiency while minimizing her exposure to enemy fire. The helicopter became an extension of her body, the cyclic and collective responding as naturally as breath and heartbeat. Each missile strike was more than destruction, it was preservation. Every engagement carved seconds, then minutes, into the defender's survival. Precision-guided bursts tore through enemy firing positions, shredding advancing lines that would have overrun the base within hours. She wasn't simply firing on visible targets, she was reshaping the battle itself. Her target selection was surgical, almost clairvoyant. She dismantled enemy communications hubs first, then anti-aircraft emplacements, then the mobile command elements coordinating their assault. Within minutes, she had converted their offensive formation into scattered, leaderless chaos. To the soldiers watching from the valley floor, it must have looked supernatural, an impossible apparition of air power resurrected from ruin. The enemy's confidence shattered. Their intelligence briefings had confirmed beyond doubt that all Apache assets were destroyed, their pilots dead or incapacitated. And yet, here it was, an attack helicopter not only airborne but operating with clinical precision and unshakable aggression. Their intelligence had been perfect. Their conclusions had been fatal. On the ground, friendly forces stared upward in disbelief that evolved into, through the chaos of smoke and tracer fire, they began to understand the truth playing out before their eyes. The quiet mechanic they dismissed for months, the one who blended into hangar shadows and smelled perpetually of oil and hydraulic fluid, was now flying the kind of sortie most veteran pilots would hesitate to attempt. Her flight wasn't just saving lives. It was rewriting the unspoken laws of hierarchy, training, and expectation. Hours passed as she maintained relentless tempo, strafing, turning, climbing, each pass precise, each missile deliberate. When her ammunition finally dropped to near-empty levels, she brought the aircraft home. The Apache descended toward the battered base like a returning guardian, its engines still radiating heat from the intensity of combat. Her landing approach was a masterclass, a smooth deceleration into hover, a gentle pivot against the crosswind, and a feather-light touchdown that barely compressed the struts. Not even the most exacting instructor could have found fault. The rotors slowed, their whine fading into the crackling hush of dust and settling debris. Around the landing pad, soldiers gathered in spontaneous formation, drawn not by orders, but by reverence. No one spoke. No one moved. They simply watched as she powered down the systems, methodically completing every post-flight check, discipline undiminished by exhaustion or adrenaline. When she finally opened the cockpit and stepped down, the general was waiting. His face held layers of emotion, relief that they'd survived, respect for what he had witnessed, and the dawning realization that his understanding of his personnel and of competence itself had been incomplete. He didn't salute. Instead, he stepped aside, clearing a path before her. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of ceremony. It was acknowledgement, not by rank or regulation, but by truth. As she walked through the gathered soldiers, the atmosphere changed. Men and women who had once overlooked her now stood at attention, their eyes following in silence. Some had tears on their faces, tears not of grief, but of humbled gratitude. No words were spoken because none were needed. Respect wasn't requested. It wasn't demanded. It was commanded, earned through unshakable proof of ability that transcended titles, expectations, and every assumption they had ever made about who she was. She didn't bask in applause, didn't wait for questions, didn't acknowledge the stunned faces that followed her every movement. When the last echoes of the rotor blades faded into the fractured quiet of the base, she simply turned and began walking back toward the maintenance hangar. Her stride was the same as always, steady, deliberate, without haste or hesitation. The same pace she had carried hours earlier, before the alarms, before the siege, before anyone knew what she truly was. Inside the hangar, smoke still hung low in the rafters. Tools were scattered across the concrete floor, forgotten in the urgency of survival. She went straight to the workbench, picked up the oil-stained rag she had set down before everything began, folded it once, and clipped it back to her belt. The gesture was simple, mechanical, yet somehow sacred. The world had shifted around her, but her habits hadn't. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She didn't explain. There were no words for what she had done, and if there had been, she wouldn't have used them. Whatever her past had been, the details were locked behind classification levels higher than most present would ever reach. Her silence, the same silence that had defined her presence on the base for months, once again became her armor. Later, when the after-action reports were compiled for transmission up the chain of command, the general made an unusual notation, one that didn't fit the standard format. Beneath the sterile language of mission summaries, he added a line in his own hand: qualified pilot identified and employed during crisis. Mission survival directly attributable to her aviation capability. Recommend immediate review of personnel files for undocumented qualifications. That unofficial sentence would ripple farther than he could have imagined. In the weeks that followed, her story began to circulate, not through official briefings or press releases, but through the quiet channels of soldiers' talk. Across forward operating bases and field outposts, the tale spread. The unassuming mechanic who, when every trained pilot was lost, had taken the sky herself and turned certain defeat into improbable survival. Each retelling grew not louder, but deeper, spoken in the hushed tone reserved for legends born from truth. She didn't correct the stories or claim ownership. She didn't seek the recognition that others tried to give her. She just kept working. Every morning she reported to the same hangar, wearing the same grease-stained coveralls, her hands once again immersed in the machinery that others relied upon. She inspected turbine housings, calibrated sensors, adjusted torque values, all with the same precision as before. To her, nothing had changed. To everyone else, everything had. Because now, whenever an Apache helicopter fired up on that flight line, whenever the turbines began to whine and the rotor blades blurred into motion, people paused. For just a moment, mechanics and pilots alike stood still, eyes unconsciously drawn to the sky. They remembered the day the base had nearly fallen, and how salvation had come not from rank or reputation, but from quiet, unseen skill. In that moment of remembrance, silence itself became a kind of salute. Her story spread through the ranks like a coded message, one that reshaped attitudes long calcified by hierarchy. It reminded everyone that capability doesn't always wear insignia, and that heroism doesn't announce itself. From that day forward, across outposts and maintenance bays throughout the region, people looked differently at the ones who worked in the background, the hands that kept machines alive. The event became more than a tale of survival. It became doctrine, a living parable about humility, assumption, and the unseen strength that holds the line when systems fail. Some stories don't need volume. They just need proof. And for those who honor quiet strength, the kind that never asks to be seen, this was proof enough.